mate, welcome to Ask a Brit. I'm doing an accent. It's harmless. It doesn't harm anybody. Welcome to Ask a Brit. This is volume 52. We're getting old. And this week, of course, the topic is British cinema. Now, if you're unfamiliar with this show, this is the show in which I ask you fine people to ask me any question you like, so long as you use this hashtag, and so long as you use the theme that is laid out at the end of the previous show. In this case, as I said, it is British cinema, which I know a little bit about, but I know a little less about than I do American cinema because I've been away for 10 years. Without further ado, let's get to the questions. First question today comes from Jamie Parton, and Jamie asks, I hope I'm not too late for the Ask a Brit question. You're not, because you're featured. In fact, you're the first one. So how did that work? Last one in, first one out. That's the wrong phrase. What are your thoughts on Edgar Wright's Cornetto Trilogy, and which is your favourite? I love the Cornetto Trilogy. I think my favourite is probably Shaun of the Dead, closely followed by Hot Fuzz, and then World's End. I think it's diminishing returns, if I'm honest. But, Shaun of the Dead is fabulous. And in fact, I was into Simon Pegg and all of his films, and Edgar Wright, I should say, and his sort of brand of humour, even before Shaun of the Dead. I grew up with this show, Spaced. I say grew up, I was already a sort of young adult by the time it came out, but I'm still growing up, so what are you going to do? And Spaced was very much along the same lines as what Shaun of the Dead would go on to be. There was a lot of sort of film references, a lot of sort of tense humour throughout, and it was brilliant. But I knew Simon Pegg, or knew of Simon Pegg, even before that, possibly before most people. Secondly, in this line of events, I'm going in reverse order. He was in a sketch show called Big Train back in, I think, the late 90s, perhaps early 2000s. But I was a big fan of Steve Coogan, and I bought all of his sort of videos and all of that. And he did a stand-up show at one point and made a DVD out of it. And one of his supporting comedians in that was Mr. Simon Pegg, a young Mr. Simon Pegg, who now does films with Tom Cruise. So next question comes from Diane Thurman. And Diane asks, are there any popular musicals or superhero action movies that were made in Britain? Well, yes, musicals certainly, although most of them, of course, went straight to the stage and have been successful there. So you've had a lot of the Andrew Lloyd Webber musicals, such as Phantom of the Opera, Cats, and all of that. And of course, Phantom of the Opera did translate to film, although not quite as successfully as it did to stage. But in terms of our own superhero, other than My Hero, which is that comedy with Ardal O'Hanlon, I don't know if we have. Do we have superheroes except for me? But I left, so I'm being facetious. I've no idea. And Diane also says, I like the actress Dawn French. She is really funny. The Vicar of Dibley was an awesome series. Has she been featured in any comedy movies? Again, I don't know if she's been featured in any comedy movies, but Dawn French does make an appearance, almost a cameo, I should say, in the Harry Potter films, because she's that sort of painting on the wall, or is it a photo, that speaks, on that stairwell. I haven't read the book, so I'm not as familiar with character names. Yes, I haven't read the books. Don't judge me, you little... Aramis 419, was there ever a Father Ted film? There wasn't, quite sadly. I mentioned Ardal O'Hanlon a moment ago. He played Father Dougal Maguire, who tried to look like that and was always confused. And, what's that over there? Sorry, that was my worst impression of an Irishman. But specifically, Father Dougal. Anyone who's not familiar, this is a series. It's technically British made, but it is set in Ireland, at Craggy Island at that. And it's about these priests and all of their hilarious antics. It seems, forgive me, I might get a lot of backlash for this. It seems a little dated now. There's a laughter track. There's quite a lot of obvious slapstick humour in it, but some of it is still funny to this day. If they made a film of it, though, I think they'd have to go darker, just to appease me, really. There hasn't been a film because, unfortunately, the person who played Father Ted Crilly died during the filming of the third series, and since the actor playing Father Jack has passed on. So it seems unlikely. I can't think that they would make it without those particular actors. Though I've seen stranger things happen. Joe Cool. I noticed that many British films and many British TV shows that portray American characters by British actors seem to speak in one accent. Most of them speak in what is known as the Midwestern or general American accent. They do a very good job, but when it comes to playing characters from the Deep South, Chicago, New York City, or the Southwest, they use the general American accent or a much exaggerated accent. Have you noticed this after being in the USA for 8 years? Yes, I have. So that is absolutely true. I think for the most part, when we try to mimic an American accent, we do go for that sort of nightly news accent as it is now. You know, Hugh Laurie does it. I've done it on occasion whenever I've been in a stage play or what have you, and I have to play an American. It's just what we know. I think in reverse, Americans attempt to do that sort of RP accent when they mimic a British accent, and the other sort of more regional accents get overlooked, partially because we're not as exposed to them. But if we are, we might consider them a little trickier, just as I think Americans would consider Scouse a tricky accent to pull off. We find the same with the Deep South. And I don't know that our ears are even attuned to know that there is a Wisconsin accent, a Boston accent, that is differentiated from sort of nearby states and cities. We just sort of hear the same sort of thing. It's only when you've lived here a little bit, like I've lived in the Midwest, I've lived in Indiana, I've lived in Chicago, and you start to see that there's a difference between not only Indiana and Chicago, but the nearby Wisconsin, Minnesota, up north in Canada. The accents do vary. There are certain sounds that you can pick out after a while, but I think just for the sake of ease, we are just stuck with that nightly news accent. So I've definitely noticed it. I do remember Ewan McGregor, though, attempting a southern accent in Big Fish, and it was pretty good, I think, although I think people from the Deep South, or just the South, might challenge my view on that, because he was a bit creaky here and there, was Ewan. All right, Chris J asks, what's your favourite Hitchcock film? I've got many, but I would say to this day it is probably Psycho. I got hooked on that film as a kid, you know, at the behest of my parents, who obviously care about child mental well-being, and allowed me to watch a film about a psychotic man in a motel. But it's perfectly acted, it's brilliantly shot, and it's also, bit of trivia, the first film to feature a flushing toilet. And this was in the 1960s. Before that, there hadn't been, because it could have caused offence, any kind of showing or sound of a toilet flushing on screen. So that was interesting. That's not why it's my favourite. It's just a very suspenseful film, and the music to that film is phenomenal. And sticking with the theme of the 1960s, the next question comes from Keith Myers, and Keith asks, speaking of British cinema, have you noticed in the films of the 1960s, and maybe others also, that the standard question is, do you mind if I smoke? And the standard answer is, no, go right ahead. Was that always a go-to question in films? I suppose it's a conversation starter, isn't it? It's a very easy way as a script writer to get a conversation going, and also to make the conversation interesting from a visual standpoint. So I suppose that's what they were going for. And of course, back in those days, cigarettes were not seen as unhealthy. Well, maybe they were, but there wasn't the warnings that came with them. There wasn't the sort of censorship that we see today, in which cigarettes and the smoking thereof is curtailed on screen. And so it was seen as cool. I mean, to smoke was cool. That's how it was branded. So we've moved on from that time. I mean, times do change, and people have stopped smoking. I mean, I only do it when I've had 4 tequilas in my stomach to this day, which, again, is unhealthy. And the final question today comes from Connor, French, and Connor asks, as British people, we pride ourselves on reserved seating at the cinema so that there is no panic when you arrive in terms of where you will sit. So this is news to me. I wonder if this is something new in the age of the internet, where we reserve our seating. It doesn't surprise me. I mean, it sounds like the very sort of thing we Brits would do. We don't want to be, if 2 of us go to the cinema, for example, and we get there and somebody's sitting near the end of the aisle, there's 1 seat next to them and 1 seat the other side, that way we'd have to sit either side. Very rarely happens, doesn't it? But there's always that fear at the back of the British mind that would have to do that and say, oh, excuse me, can I get past you, please, you little And so we reserve, apparently, according to Connor, the right to have our seats before we go there, the assigned seats. I have actually done that in the US, though. I went to see a showing of Phantom Thread, a wonderfully surreal film, apparently Daniel Day-Lewis's last, although he said that before. And that was nice. I suppose it was good knowing you'd turn up and you'd have the seats that you chose, but I really don't care enough. Unless, it's a midnight showing of Star Wars, I'm not really that concerned. I usually get a good seat, and I'm one of those people who's happy sitting at the side seeing it, because you're still seeing the same big screen. The only one I don't like is the first row where you're doing this, and you break your neck. Sorry about that. That's it for this episode of Ask a Brit. I had to keep it a little bit shorter this week just because I've got a lot going on with editing for the San Francisco video. And on that very note, the theme for the next show is going to be San Francisco. Until next time, have a great week, and I will see you soon. You'll see me. It's in reverse. Bye. Thank you for watching this episode of Ask a Brit. Don't forget to hit my stupid little face to subscribe, and please share this video with the world. Hit me up on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and if you'd like to support this channel, please do so at patreon.com/lostinthepond.